Hello, friends. My name is Brad Rowland, and I'm the host of the Locked On Hawks podcast. And I am joined on today's crossover edition by Wes Goldberg of Locked On Heat. Wes takes the reins in what was going to be our final preview installment in advance of Tuesday's playing matchup between the Hawks and the Miami Heat. If you missed it, I talked to Glenn Willis for about an hour on Monday in a full deep dive fashion about the Hawks side of things. Also, some bonus episodes in the feed right now, previewing things from the Heat side, from the Hawks side, also a recap of the Hawks-Celtics game from last week. It's been very busy on the podcast, and there was one more order of business with Wes asking me to come on in this crossover fashion. We talk about the series as a whole, talk about Trae Young and his impact on the game, and also his future potentially in Atlanta. He was asking about that in the wake of a Ringer report on Monday morning, and also Jimmy Butler, how all that will be approached by the Hawks in this game if the Hawks have a chance to win this one on the road in Miami. We'll get into all kinds of topics, but that's going to be our final preview episode on this mix here. And without further delay, we'll get into the intro, and when we come back, it'll be myself and Wes Goldberg of Locked On Heat talking about all things Hawks Heat, and we'll be back again after the game on Tuesday.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. I'm Wes Goldberg. However, you might be tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app. Thanks so much for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day and for hitting that subscribe button. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. A Locked On Heat, Locked On Hawks crossover. Joining me today is Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks. We're going to preview Tuesday night's play-in game between the Heat and the Hawks. First time the Heat have been involved in a play-in game. Not the first time for the Atlanta Hawks, who beat the Cavs in last year's play-in game. Brad, I just want to start right there. I think this whole thing is new for Heat fans, obviously. You know, the Heat have been involved in high-stakes games, but still nothing quite like, Game 7s, even last year in the Eastern Conference Finals, but still nothing quite like one game, sort of March Madness style knockout. I know they've, if you lose this game, you've got another game against the winner of the 9-10 game to advance as the 8th seed, but this is still kind of a unique kind of thing, having covered a team that has done this before. What kind of stood out to you about last year's experience? And does it feel different having covered it, talking to players, coaches, all these things, and kind of thinking from their perspective, if it feels different for them? Is it different at all?
I think a little bit. I mean, it kind of has to be. It's still fairly new, number one. Like, this has not been going on for all that long. So teams have played it multiple times now, but, I'm sure the Heat had different expectations on some level. But, like, once the Hawks became clear they were going to be kind of in the middle of the playoff mix somewhere, the marching orders were to be in the top 6. Like, no one wants to be in the play-in. And when you're in the play-in, there's a level of uncomfortability there. Like, no one's going to be entering this week. Even, Miami's going to be the favorite in the game. We all know that. But, like, no one's going to be comfortable with that. Like, it's a one-game season, like you said. And, yeah, it's different to be in the 7-8 versus the 9-10. The Hawks were in the 9-10 last year. That means you had to win twice, and then you're really walking a tightrope, because even if you do that, you're probably gassed, and you're going into a playoff series against number 1 seed, number 2 seed coming after that. So, it's a little bit different. Everyone's kind of on the edge of their seats because there's just no margin for error. And over the course of a series, even if you're the better team, you gotta have more time to get sorted out. If you are not the better team in the first half, even you look up at halftime, you're down by 15 points, and you're looking at, like, what happened here? Like, you have one bad half and you're in some trouble. So the margins are just narrow. Obviously, the stakes are not quite as high, like you said, as Eastern Conference Finals or whatever. But it is a game that has a unique sort of pressure cooker.
The margins are narrower. The variance is way higher too. I mean, it's one game. I mean, one guy goes off and makes 8 3-pointers in the game, and that can swing it, right? And you mentioned the Hawks. They got through the 2 games. They ended up playing the number 1 seed Miami Heat last year as the number 8 seed. Of course, the Heat won that series 4-1. Trae Young trapped, struggled, all these things. They go into the offseason, the Hawks do. They go out and add DeJounte Murray. A year later, they make a coaching change. Quinn Snyder in, Nate McMillan out. Trae Young has sort of evolved. They've been working out with the chemistry with him and DeJounte Murray. It's still a little clunky here and there. I do want to touch on that later, but all of that stuff happens, and the Hawks are still 1-3 against the Heat this year. The Heat are 3-1 against the Hawks so far this season going into this game. obviously division rivals, things like that. What's, from the Hawks perspective, the view of the Miami Heat? Is it sort of bully big brother, boogeyman kind of thing? Is there sort of like, what is it with the Hawks and how they view the Miami Heat right now?
Anytime a playoff series goes the way it went last year, and it was lopsided, there was no way around that. The Hawks knew, and I think they probably downplay this, but I think what they did in the offseason was a direct response to how bad that series went and how it went bad with regard to Trae and all of that stuff. So that carries over. I think that you would acknowledge, like, this is not quite the same Heat team as it was last year. This is not the number 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, so there's not quite that level of maybe assertiveness. And yes, they were 1-3 against the Heat this year, but all 4 games were relatively close, single-digit games. The Hawks were more competitive in those games than they were in the playoff series. Does that matter? Who knows? The Hawks are healthier this time around. That probably helps things as well. There were some pre-documented injury issues last time around too. I'm not sure that would have changed the series all the way through, but it would have been something perhaps. And I think that, they probably view Miami as a team that they've seen 4 times a year for a long time now. It's a pretty similar team. Again, not quite as good as it was last year, but it's still Jimmy, it's still Bam, it's still Spo, it's still the same structure in some ways. So there's familiarity there, which can be good. It can be bad. But I think they feel like they have a puncher's chance, but there is that annoyance factor almost of like having a division rival, so to speak, be the team that you see in this 1 game scenario.
It's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, like you said, these teams see each other 4 times a year by definition. They saw each other in the playoffs for an extra 5 games last year. And it does sort of feel like every time you look up, the Miami Heat and the Atlanta Hawks are playing a basketball game. And, you mentioned how they're kind of the same. The Heat, look, it's been a frustrating year for the Miami Heat. They don't want to be in the play-in game. They've kind of had to settle into that new reality and settle into the fact that they have to face the Hawks again here to try to get into the playoffs as the number 7 seed. But, PJ Tucker was an important part of their defense last year. They lose him in the offseason, and then they kind of just Band-Aid solution the power forward spot for all season. They start with the undersized Caleb Martin at the 4. All-Star break comes. They come out the other side. They've signed Kevin Love on the buyout. He starts at the 4. That didn't quite work out. They put him on the bench. He's now backing up Bam Adebayo as the center, and now they have basically a 3-guard starting lineup. They've got Max Strus sort of listed at power forward because for some reason Jimmy Butler does not want to be listed at power forward. But for all intents and purposes, it's a 3-guard lineup of Gabe Vincent because now Kyle Lowry is the 6th man coming off the bench. So Gabe Vincent is the starter. Tyler Hero, obviously, Max Strus, Jimmy Butler, and Bam Adebayo. And all that said, they're still doing the same thing. They're still every time they play the Hawks, Trae Young comes off of a ball screen and they're going to trap him and they're going to be aggressive. It really messed up Trae Young last year. I mean, he had more turnovers than assists in that series. He averaged 13 points a game on terrible shooting numbers, 18% from 3-point range, something like that. This year, it's been a little bit better, though. He's up to like 19 points per game against the Heat. The shooting percentages are a little bit better. The assist to turnover ratio isn't upside down the way it was in last year's series. But how have you seen Trae Young sort of evolve as he's approached that? It's not just the Heat that do it. A lot of teams try to do it against him because he's so small. But how have you seen him evolve in terms of how he approaches and counters and attacks on offense when defenses are trying to trap him off those ball screens?
I'm glad you laid it out that way too, because Trae it's not like Miami's doing anything that's like totally off the wall against Trae for whatever reason. Perhaps it's execution, perhaps it's just coaching and acumen and all that. He's credited Gabe Vincent in the past. He's credited Bam for really kind of blowing things up. And Bam is a unique player, as you well know. So maybe that's part of it. But like he's not seeing stuff he hasn't seen before. And part of it in the playoff series, I think that's why they went and got Murray last year, was that they thought there was nobody else. And Miami basically, in the nicest way possible, disrespected everybody else. They were not going to let Trae beat them, and that was the right decision. The Hawks didn't have number 2 guy that was going to beat them. It was a lot of DeAndre Hunter, and that's not a guy who's going to be able to beat you in that same way. But as far as Trae's concerned, like he has been better this year. The shooting numbers in particular, are still not very good against Miami. It's a small sample size. He was definitely a little bit more comfortable, whether it's because there's no PJ around or whatever it was going to be. You can sort of attribute your favorite narrative there, kind of wherever you choose it. But I think the last game that they played in the regular season, I think it was March 6th against each other, was his most comfortable game. I think that was also with this new coaching staff. Nate McMillan no longer walking through that door for the Hawks, which I think gives them a little bit more confidence because Nate, for whatever reason, him and Spo dominated that matchup anytime they saw each other, even dating back to Indiana. maybe that's part of it. But Trae just looked like they had more answers. It wasn't like it was perfect. They lost the game by 2 points. It was more of a shootout than you might expect from a Hawks Heat matchup. But little incremental things. Maybe it's just having Murray on the floor next to him, just to have another guy that they have to respect. I think comfortability is probably the biggest thing because Trae is a very smart player. No matter what you think of him, he does adapt well. Usually, it's why it was so jarring when he was so bad the entire series. He just kind of never had plan B. He usually has a plan B. So I think he'll have something different, I would imagine, between him and this new staff sort of approaching Tuesday.
I went back and watched the film because the other interesting thing about this matchup is not a lot of teams have seen the new Hawks with Quinn Snyder. And if they have, it's one game, but not the Miami Heat. Quinn Snyder got hired and it was a little bit after that. He even had a little bit of time to settle in there. And then the Heat saw the Hawks 2 games at home in that kind of baseball series that the NBA has implemented recently. And they saw him. And so I went back and watched the film on those 2 games just to kind of get a feel for it. And one of the things that I've noticed Trae Young get really good at is just attacking earlier in the shot clock so that he's not really giving the defense a chance to trap and have that second defender get settled coming off of that ball screen, right? And so, they'll get them downhill. They'll even set screens closer to the basket as opposed to really up high. They'll mix up like the level of the screen a lot offensively so that, the defense doesn't really know where that screen is going to be set, where it's like last year, it just felt like every time down the court, oh, you're going to set that screen 32 feet away from the basket. Cool. Thanks. I'm already here. You know what I mean? And so they've done a better job of mixing up the levels of the screens and where they are on the court. And Trae Young's done a better job of just getting downhill, attacking, and not really screwing around a whole lot. Like, I think Trae Young gets in a lot of trouble when he over dribbles. Not breaking news there, but against the Heat in those 2 games, I noticed that he's just kind of all right, like 3 dribbles off that screen and then just find an open shooter or take my shot if I have it. And I thought I thought that was that's going to be an adjustment, and that was like the counter. And I thought the Heat were a little ill-prepared at times for that. They ended up winning both of those games, but they had to score 128 points or 130 points in one of those games because they gave up 128 to the Hawks, which is not the way they want to beat the Hawks if they're going to win those games. So he's clearly really intelligent. Clearly, he's got great feel for the game and has made some sort of step forward in terms of how he wants to attack, specifically the Miami Heat trap, which, as you mentioned, they do execute really well. They are really aggressive. They are very physical, and I think it's different than even when other teams try to trap, even though it's kind of the same book every time you play the Atlanta Hawks. You mentioned Trae Young and DeJounte Murray there and the kind of the release valve that Murray could be. And then Quinn Snyder, too. There's a lot going on with the Atlanta Hawks. And I do wonder if they're even motivated to win this game. At the same time, it's been a very frustrating year for the Miami Heat. I think it's a fair question. Which team is more motivated to even win this thing? Because it kind of feels like in a 1-game playoff, that could really matter. We're going to talk about that next. But first, today's episode of crossover episode between Locked On Heat and Locked On Hawks is brought to you by the Gametime app. Buying tickets to your favorite events should not be a stressful situation. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theaters near you with killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee. You could stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're going to have. I've used the Gametime app even before they were a sponsor of the Locked On Podcast Network. I think it's awesome. I would not call myself a baseball fan, but I enjoy going to a baseball game. I live close to the Miami Marlins arena. It's very easy to go, okay, hey, it's a Saturday afternoon. They're already in the 2nd inning. Let me check how much it would be on the Gametime app to get a ticket and get into the game. And they've got good food, good beer, stuff like that. It's just a good hang. And I've gotten tickets for like Marlins games for like $5 a pop. And my wife and I will go and have an awesome time. So highly recommend this app. It's great. We're really excited that they're partners with the Locked On Podcast Network. Forget planning months in advance. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the day of event, even in the 2nd inning. Get exclusive flash deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seats before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps, and you're all set. Tickets are sent directly to your phone, so you never even have to dig through your email. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All your Locked On shows are available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Spotify, so make sure that you're subscribed. All right. Who's more motivated to win this game, Brad? Do you think it's where are the Hawks even stand? Like, I think a lot of people from the outside look at this as a transition year, but they have a chance to make the playoffs. How motivated are they?
Yeah, it's really kind of fascinating. Like nationally, you wouldn't consider this angle too much, but you bring in Quinn Snyder in the middle of a season, really 2/3 through the season. That's already way off the radar. You don't normally see a guy who's as established and respected and highly paid, also like this huge contract to come in mid-season from outside the organization, and also in the middle of a playoff race, because the Hawks weren't out of it. Like the few times this has actually happened, it's been either really early in the season or really late when a team's kind of just done, like Chris Finch in Minnesota or whatever. So there's already uncharted. They've kind of embraced that. Quinn's admitted like it's pretty strange. Like he has his the full staff. It's not his staff. It was the previous staff. Like it's this whole mismatch thing, and I think I've observed, like, I think there's a little bit of evaluation happening versus like pedal to the floor trying to win. They're obviously trying to win now. They're too invested to win now to not try to win. But I do think that Quinn is keeping at least publicly a sort of a step away from everything, just to say, look, I just got here. I'm figuring it all out. Future facing comments, etc. But they do want to win. This is especially from the top down. This is an ownership group, a leadership group that like they get trigger happy. And if they were to, let's say, lose back-to-back playing games and miss the playoffs after all that investment, no one's going to be happy. I think maybe in the locker room, maybe in Snyder's office, he'll be okay because they just realize like, does it really actually matter? First round loss probably versus play-in loss, but at the top, it could really matter. So I think these guys want to win. Trae's really competitive. This is a competitive roster, and it's not that young of a roster anymore. They're still fairly young, but they're not incredibly young anymore either. So Miami's in a different spot, and I'll let you speak to that because they're not used to being here. But the Hawks did this before. They got out of it. They actually won through the play-in, but it's definitely an odd situation because of all the turmoil, maybe not in the most negative sense, but just the way that it's all changed over in the last few months and kind of a whole new direction.
Yeah, I think in the Heat's perspective, they're extremely motivated. You're talking about the Hawks and how forward-looking they are, and you get it, right? They are a little bit getting older, but Trae Young is still young. We're going to talk about his future in Atlanta here in a second, but you just had DeJounte Murray. You're still sort of working that out. Obviously, the Quinn Snyder thing, the front office changes, all that. It kind of feels like this is a transition year for better or worse, and that they expect that there's better basketball in the coming seasons than what happened this year. Where with the Miami Heat, I don't know that there's a sort of a sense of how long is this going to go? How much longer of Jimmy Butler's prime do you have? It's a very sort of immediate thing for the Miami Heat. And so I think they're very motivated to get out of the plan. I think they're very disappointed to be here in the first place. But they've had to sort of accept that reality. And look, this is a team that is kind of foaming at the mouth for a chance to play the Boston Celtics. So it's not just get out of the play-in tournament. It's specifically get number 7 so that they could play the Celtics. This is not a team that typically allows itself to talk about looking ahead or what's on the other side of any game. They're very like cliche in that it's one game at a time, blah, 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 even though, you and I both know that that's not necessarily true. But they have sort of allowed themselves this week or just today at practice to kind of talk about, we want the Celtics on the other side of this. So there is a motivation there, and I have no problem with it. And they should be motivated because the fact that they're here at number 7 is disappointing. And considering the talent, the high-level talent on this roster, I should say, with Jimmy and Bam, they shouldn't be here, especially because they were the number 1 seed last year, too. How do the Hawks win this one?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question, of course, I'm trying to answer. And I think if you look at even the regular season and just the way the Hawks are structured, they're going to have to score in this matchup. And it was actually, I was surprised looking back both at film and the numbers, how well they scored against Miami this year. They actually gave up a bunch of points, and you would think that after the playoff series they'd be unable to score. They actually scored fairly well. They were pretty efficient. They shot the ball pretty well against Miami this year. It didn't result in wins, but the Hawks have been even more extreme in the second half of the season. I use second half to be post-All-Star breaks, so really the last third of the season. They're like number 2 or 3 in the league in offense, and they're bottom 5 in defense. And that's kind of an old school Hawks thing, like from last year, like where they were just elite on one end, awful on the other. And I think that, like in this matchup, and you can tell me more about Miami's offense, but if you look at the structure, like Miami's been a pretty bad offensive team for a lot of this year, which is kind of surprising. If you look at their roster, it shouldn't be this bad, but that's kind of what you would think. So for the Hawks, it's kind of the same formula that they're always trying to look at. It's outscore the other team. And that's very simplified, of course. But they need Trae to be obviously leaps and bounds better than he was a year ago. They're not winning the series if Trae Young is even slightly better than he was a year ago in that series. I know this is only a 1-game sample size, and then maybe they could win it even with Trae having a bad night. But I think he's got to be better. That's very simple. And I think the Hawks at least they're signaling that they might lean a little bit more offense. They might go with Sadiq Bey a little bit more than John Collins. They might go a little bit smaller. And that you can do that against Miami's because of what you said earlier in this podcast, even how small they go. If Jimmy's going to be your 4 most of the time, or your other 4 is Max Strus, like you can afford to go smaller than you might go against other teams. So I think maybe a high scoring affair leans in the Hawks direction, even though they've lost a couple of those to Miami this year. I think they probably still want to play this game fast and not grind it out, because Miami is just much more well built, particularly around Jimmy and Bam, to play that grinded out style. I think the Hawks want to get up and go, play this one in the 120s if they can, and then that gives them the best chance to win.
No doubt, right? And the Heat, like you said, they want to do the exact opposite.
Yeah.
They want this game played in like the 100 to 110 range, right? And I think that's probably where their sweet spot are, like really like 95 to 105 would really be the sweet spot for Miami. They made those changes to the starting lineup because their offense was so bad, to your point, and it has been trending better lately. More space around Jimmy and Bam with that extra shooter out there being Max Strus. And over the last 15 games, their 3-point percentage has gone from bottom 5 in the league to top 10 in the league. They're shooting 37% over that span over the last 15 games. And you can credit some of that to just positive regression to the mean. It was bound to happen at some point. And some of the lineup changes and the fact that they're just playing through Jimmy more, right? Like we've kind of seen playoff Jimmy Butler engaged at the end of the regular season, where it kind of took a couple of rounds last year to even get there in the playoffs. And then, of course, we saw that eruption in the Eastern Conference Finals against Boston. But he's been playing like that for the most part, like probably 85% of that, 90% of that. And the Heat have been playing through him, and it's creating so many open looks for the other guys around him. And I was watching the film, and you mentioned sort of like the pace of the game and the tone of the game. To me, it's like Jimmy Butler has to set the tone for the Heat in this one. It's going to be Jimmy Butler's tone versus Trae Young's tone, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be sort of the tug of war in this one. And, you know, when Jimmy, like there's a lot of soft spots in Atlanta's defense for Jimmy Butler to kind of poke at. And the one obvious one is going to be Trae Young. Every team with a big wing wants to kind of bring Trae Young into a switch and then attack him into the post and get him into the paint and go to work. And I thought the Hawks have done an okay job at trying to keep Trae Young out of those switches, or even when he does get pinned in there, kick him out with another defender or something like that. And there was this one play in the last time that these teams met where Jimmy's working, trying to get Trae Young, kind of finally gets Trae Young briefly, and then John Collins kicks him out really quick. And then it's John Collins versus Jimmy Butler. And Jimmy Butler is like, all right, you know what? I tried, but it's just John Collins in front of me. So this is what I'm going to do. And he kind of just backpedals like 2 to 3 steps and then just torpedoes his way towards the basket, takes his left shoulder and just bumps John Collins. John Collins is a big dude. Just bumps him right out of the way. Jimmy Butler does not move, and he just lays it in with like a soft layup. And I'm just like, who can do this? It's like him and Kawhi, I feel like, are the guys that know how to do this in that specific kind of way. You know, you got Embiid and Giannis that are just going to like literally just plow their whole bodies through you. But just like that level of physicality, I don't know that the Hawks have anybody that could match it. DeAndre Hunter has done a pretty good job against Jimmy Butler. But that's really like when I look up and down that roster for Atlanta, I'm like, I'm not looking at anybody that Jimmy Butler is scared of. You know what I mean? And if he can kind of burrow his way into the paint and do those things and control the pace that way and then create those threes for Gabe, Vincent, Max Strus, Caleb Martin, etc., that's how the Heat win this game. And then, you know, it does come down to those guys making shots, because Jimmy Butler's not going to go out there and score 50 points. That's just not his game. He's going to need his teammates to make shots. And I kind of go back to it, man. Like the variance of this game is crazy. You know, if Bogdan Bogdanović goes out for 30 points on, 8 for 13 3-point shooting, that could win the game for Atlanta. And now Miami's having to play a 9-10 game on Friday. So we can hash out the matchup as much as we want. But at the end of the day, I hate to say it, but it doesn't feel like it's just sort of like, I don't know. We'll see. It's one game, right? Like the variance could just take over in this one.
Yeah. I mean, anytime you have a game that's a 1-game sample size anyway, but then you have Miami's semi-comfortably favored, 5.5 points, according to FanDuel, our friends over there. And like, that's not a huge margin. I mean, it's a notable margin, but it's not one where like one team is this hammer of a favorite in this game. And with the way that the Hawks can shoot it and where the Hawks can score, they can close that gap. You're right about Jimmy. I mean, if he's his best, the Hawks can't really stop him. I think that's probably worth acknowledging. They have bodies to throw at him. On one hand, Atlanta is worse against quicker guys usually, and that's not Jimmy's game, but he is so strong and he's so strong-willed that it may not matter. You know, like they're almost better suited to cover him than they are a lot of other like star level perimeter guys. but that might just be neutralized if he has it going. So yeah, I think that certainly there's an element of a shrug at the end of this thing. Every preview that I've done so far, it's kind of like, well, the Heat are probably a little bit better. They're playing at home, but if the Hawks go out and shoot 45% from three in this game, like they obviously can win. It's not like they can't win. I think even the biggest Heat homer probably acknowledges the Hawks can win this game. It's not like it's this 7. It's not a 12-game series or 13-game series. Like it's one night, and if things go wrong for either side, it can snowball for you.
Heat fans really feel like they own the Atlanta Hawks, and they have.
I get
basically.
it. Yeah.
You know, they've won 8 of the last 10 times that these teams have met. The Heat have won, or whatever, 7 of the last 9. I'm bad at math. It's a theme here on Locked On Heat. But in that respect, they have. But I just wrote a whole thing about this at allyoucaneat.com, like an in-depth preview that basically was like, just don't overlook the Hawks, right? Like this isn't a walkover. Like Trae Young is really freaking good. DeJounte Murray is dangerous. The one win that the Hawks have this season over the Heat, DeJounte Murray went out and scored like 28 points or something like that, 27 points, something, and just went off. And there's times where DeJounte Murray kind of made Bam Adebayo uncomfortable defensively, which is not really a thing that happens anymore. And DeJounte Murray got the better of him the last time these two teams met a few times. So there's weapons that the Hawks have. I don't think the Heat can overlook them. If I had to make a pick, I would pick the Miami Heat to win this. It's at home. It's Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo and Eric Spoelstra. I just trust them more than I just trust the Atlanta Hawks. So I would go with them if I had to make a pick, but that doesn't mean anything. You know what I mean? So,
yeah.
All right. Reports indicating that maybe this could be Trae Young's last season in Atlanta. We're going to ask Brad if he buys into that and what could happen this offseason for the Hawks. That's coming up next. But first, today's episode of Locked On Heat and Locked On Hawks is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks. Daily fantasy made easy. All you have to do to play is pick 2 to 5 players, and if they're going to score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 extra money on any entry. And the best part, no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections that are available. PrizePicks offers projections on any sport that you watch, including the NBA, NFL, Major League Baseball, NHL, PGA, college football, men's college basketball, women's college basketball, soccer, and so much more. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. They offer safe and fast withdrawals, and they're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. So if you deposit $100, PrizePicks is going to give you $100 to play with. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks is going to give you $50. Don't forget to enter the promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy made easy. All right, let's get to it. Kevin O'Connor of The Ringer reporting on Monday morning that the Atlanta Hawks have the green light to do whatever it wants with the roster, quote, which includes considering trade opportunities involving all-star point guard Trae Young, end quote. That's directly from O'Connor's article. Brad, let's just jump right in. What do you think about this? Do you buy it? Does it make sense to you?
The almighty question there, obviously. I think it's interesting. Everything about this is interesting. The timing is interesting, right before the play-in and right after the regular season. There was the flurry. I'm sure you remember this early in the season where you had the sort of, I think it was a Chris Haynes report. It was kind of like Trae could be the next guy to ask out if so and so and so and so and so happens. Right. No one's gone as far as to like actually report that Trae is unhappy to ask out. And my party line, and this still is the case now as a general response, is like, I don't think the Hawks are in a place where they would trade Trae Young unless Trae Young wanted to be traded. Could that change? It could. I'm not going to say it's never going to happen the other way around, but all indications that I've ever heard still to this point is that ownership on down, they're tied to Trae Young. And they made a big splash when they traded him in the first place. They're invested in him. He's their guy. Jersey sales, all those things. Like he's the face of the franchise, and it's kind of unique if you don't live here. But like he's clearly the biggest star for this franchise since Dominique Wilkins. That's a long time. Like Dominique got traded 30 plus years ago. The Hawks have been good since then. Joe Johnson, Al Horford, etc. But Trae Young is a different kind of star, a different kind of famous than those guys ever were. And I think that generally, I mean, you know this. How many times does a guy with the profile of Trae Young get traded without wanting to be traded? It just doesn't happen very often. And even if you're really low on Trae Young, and I know people are, and I get it, like defensive questions, all that stuff, small guards don't win championships. I get all the arguments against and for, but you got to show me examples of teams punting on a guy like Trae Young, who averages what he averages, who has brought what he's brought, conference finals appearances, all those things. Like, until I hear something different, I'm going to assume that he's going to be there unless he goes the other way and wants out, because usually, like, guys, if they want to get out, they get out. So that's the other thing. So, but the reporting here from KOC was more like maybe the Hawks move on, and I kind of don't buy. I'm not saying he's wrong. I don't buy it.
Yeah, I don't doubt his reporting. I guess my question is, why would you do that if you're the Atlanta Hawks? Like, yeah, look, I'm not the biggest Trae Young guy. I'm gonna be honest. I think that there's a pretty hard ceiling to how much you can win if Trae Young's your best player. And I also don't know that Trae Young would be like totally cool with not being the best player on a team. But that can change. That's just based on what we know of Trae Young so far, however old he is now, 23, 24, whatever. So that stuff can change. But so far, I don't know. Like, even if you're the Hawks front office and you go into the offseason, like, what are you going to do? Reshuffle by trading Trae Young and just sort of build around, like, I like DeJounte Murray, but you're going to build around DeJounte Murray and Onyeka Okongwu? Like, is that the plan? If you trade Trae Young, obviously whatever you get for Trae Young back could be good, but like, I don't know. I saw some like Bleacher Report aggregate. I don't know how true this is, like, and even the aggregate, but it was like Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson in a first for Trae Young. Like, I'm like, okay, like, I don't care how upset Trae Young is. Like, they're not doing that. So,
there's no way. And yeah, that's the other part of this. It's so entertaining to me, as I try to be pretty neutral about these things. And like, even if you said, okay, we're going to trade Trae, which the machinations of that would be interesting. Like, do you just like kind of put him up for sale? Like, do you call around the league and say, all right, make your best offer for Trae Young, or do you try to do it quietly? That's the other thing. Like, do you want to just make it a smaller pool, or do you want to get your best offer? But I've yet to see a realistic. I mean, if you just assume he's going to get traded, what's it going to be back? I mean, I agree with you. I mean, DeJounte Murray's a nice player. He's not a number one on a good team. I think we could probably agree on that.
Yeah.
So what's your plan?
It would have to be a full like Utah Jazz style like blow up. You're trading,
but they're not going to do that. And they're not.
Murray. Yeah, and it feels so soon to do like that. Utah Jazz team had like years of going through the playoffs and like kind of hating each other from the outside in perspective. Like, you know what I mean? Like Quinn Snyder, that he kind of like ran his course there. Like Quinn Snyder just got here to Atlanta, and it doesn't feel like ready. Like, it doesn't feel like the Hawks are at that point yet.
Well, and also Utah. To your point about Utah, that Utah team is a good example, obviously, but they didn't bottom out before that. Like, they didn't do the whole rebuild. They kind of got, I don't want to say lucky, but you know what I mean? They got Mitchell and Gobert with non-top 10 picks. Like, those are guys that were not. Yeah, true. This is a Hawks team that just did this. They just did the rebuild and came out of it with Trae as their guy. Like, do you want to do that again? I don't think so. I mean, this is obviously more of an Atlanta market discussion to be had, but like, I don't think they have the appetite for that. So it's different if Trae makes it easy on you, quote unquote, and goes out there and says, I want out. Then you kind of have to do it. I get it. Maybe you don't have to, but you know what I mean? Most of the time, guys get out. KD got out. It took a little longer than we thought, but he got out. And Trae's not KD, but like, and short of that, I just don't see the internal motivation to do that. I mean, maybe Quinn Snyder, I guess there was something in there from KOC about like, Quinn's got all the power now. And I would buy that. I think he has a lot of juice. But is he going to decide after 22 games or whatever to trade Trae Young as his like first salvo out of the gate? I don't see it happen.
The only way it happens, and maybe this is true, is if he freaking hates him. And if it's just like, I am sick, it would have to be that.
Yeah, it has to be that.
Right. And so that's kind of the point. Or like you said, if Trae Young is like, I hate it here, get me out of here. And it feels like it would almost have to be an emotional breaking point as opposed to sort of like an Excel spreadsheet version of team building, right? Where that's kind of where it felt like Utah was coming from. We talked about all the emotional stuff, but when you look at what that ceiling, like a proven ceiling to that team, with a crude track record of years of making the playoffs and not making it very far, they're like, okay, we kind of have a proven kind of sample size of what the ceiling is, and it's not championship. And Danny Ainge went in there and was like, well, we want to have a championship ceiling, so we blew it up. I still feel like we don't really have any idea how good this Hawks team could be. Full year of Quinn Snyder, kind of figuring out, some of the things. You mentioned the turmoil that this team has gone through this year. I think this roster is still really talented. I think there's a better version of a season for the Hawks, maybe even as soon as next year than what happened this year. All right. I kind of made my pick already. I didn't ask you for your pick. It wouldn't be a sports show if I didn't ask you for a pick.
It's okay. I was expecting that, and I had to give one to somebody else already today. I if I had to choose the winner of the game, I think my brain won't allow me to pick the Hawks, if that makes sense. I think the Heat are the favorite for a reason. I think, lean the Hawks on the point spread if I had to choose. I think the Hawks plus whatever it is, 5.5.
I'm with you.
I'd lean that if I had to pick that either way. But as far as the winner, like, you know, you can be emotional, but like there's a reason Miami's whatever they are, like a 65% favorite in the money line or whatever you want, if you want to translate that. So like they're the better team this year so far. They have the more established core. They have the head coach that's been there forever, and I think for the first time in a long time, the Hawks don't have a huge coaching disadvantage in this matchup, but still, Spoelstra is really good. And I think maybe more importantly, besides Jimmy, is the game's in Miami. Like that helps too. And I mean, even hearing from you how much they are motivated internally to not only just win this one, but to get to Boston, like that isn't to make you feel great if you're the Hawks, I don't think, on the outside, because this is going to be a focused team. So yeah, I think you got to pick Miami, but I do think the Hawks keep it close. And I mean, you even acknowledged it. The Hawks can win this game very easily. It would not surprise me if the Hawks won. If I had to choose for my life, I would pick Miami.
In these playing games, it should never be a surprise if either of these teams win. I mean, again, like that's the whole nature of it. It's why they made it. There's an excitement factor in that it doesn't really exist in any.
The Hawks are 41-41, and famously the most like mid team of all time by the numbers. Right. So like they could play awesome on Tuesday, they could play terribly on Tuesday, and I would not be surprised by your outcome.
Quick yes or no: if they lose this game against Miami on Tuesday night, do you like their chances to come out of the winner of the 9-10, kind of that second playing game?
Yeah, I do. Same thing. Like they'll be at home this time, and I think they're at least as good, if not better, than either Toronto or Chicago. So I would lean to the Hawks getting in either way, but probably more likely as the 8 seed than the 7.
I'm with you. All right, that'll do it for today's crossover episode between Locked On Heat and Locked On Hawks. Make Locked On Heat or Locked On Hawks your first listen every day. Remember to subscribe to new episodes on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. We'll both be back, I would imagine, with a recap of whatever happens Tuesday night. Brad, thanks for joining me. This was fun.
Thanks, Wes.